At 02:48 a.m., October 29, 2025, over Serapol in occupied Crimea, a weapon worth $15 million did something no one expected. It killed itself. Blinded by layered electronic attack and panicked by a swarm of low-cost Ukrainian drones, the air defense unit's fire control computer collapsed under contradictory inputs. The result was instant and brutal. A Mach 4 interceptor detonated inside its own launcher. 1 second later, a single 200-kilo ATACMS warhead finished the job. What reads like a suicide note for high-end hardware began. 15 minutes earlier, with 5 cheap drones and a curtain of wet fog, at 2:43 am, the operation went live. Not from a hardened airfield, but from a muddy field near Kherson, where a mobile catapult hissed and spat 5 Bober airframes into the night. 4 were hunters, decoys programmed for misdirection. The 5th was the Alpha, the Ghost Bober. They dropped into the fog at 40 feet, using the weather as an invisibility cloak as they crossed the line of contact. The first line of Russian defense wasn't a radar dish. It was the terrified hearing of 45 infantrymen in shallow foxholes. They heard it before they saw anything. A high insectile whine building out of the fog like hornets converging. Tracer rounds from a Zu-23-2 shredded the Merc at 2,000 rounds per minute, while air defense teams fired missiles into silhouettes. It looked spectacular. It did nothing. Visibility in the fog was under 100 feet. The drones flew at 40. Trying to hit them was like shooting hummingbirds in a hurricane blindfolded. Rather than slip past unnoticed, Bober 1 did the unexpected. It broke formation and executed a deliberate suicide dive into a non-critical communications mast. Its small warhead detonated. Physical damage negligible, but the tactical effect was immediate. The explosion confirmed a threat the infantry could not handle and forced the next ring of air defense to wake up. Inside the Simfal command, a Nebo-M operator watched the thermal feed register the tiny blast. His radar, however, still displayed 5 contacts. The 5th return wasn't a physical target, it was an electronic phantom. The Ghost Bober broadcasting a synthetic signature to preserve the swarm's electronic profile and multiply confusion. The operator was now hunting 4 real vehicles and 1 high-fidelity lie. The 4 decoys began the second act of deception. Their transponders chirped a synthetic telemetry that mimicked migratory bird flight patterns. The Nebo-M's classification algorithm, trying to reconcile 4 bird-like tracks and 1 persistent phantom in the fog, down-ranked the real decoys to low-priority biologicals. That micro-hesitation bought the Ukrainians their launch window. 2:49 a.m. Bam! 20 meters away, a HIMARS variant fired a single ATACMS. The launcher crew didn't stay to admire the bloom. Once they launched, they became the hunted. The thermal signature from the ATACMS launch was massive and unmaskable, visible to Russian satellites and loud on acoustic sensors. A counter-battery node, almost certainly a Zoopark 1M, triangulated their coordinates within seconds. A kill chain began to compute. Doctrine made the Russians predictable. Their estimated response window, the flight time for a Smerch or Tornado rocket to the launch point, was 4 to 6 minutes. Their playbook was not merely shoot and scoot. It was a clockwork choreography of counter-fire and interdiction. With the ATACMS in flight, Russian EW arrays leapt into life. The Krasuka 4 surged, painting a 300-kilometer jamming bubble into the sky. For the 4 decoys, it was instantaneous. Their Starlink uplinks collapsed, and their C2 links died. For 10 frozen seconds, they were expensive gliders. This is where 99% of swarms die. Under enemy jamming, they simply fall from the sky. On the Russian screens, the drones winked out. A textbook defeat, if you believe only your sensors. But the Ghost Bober was never just a recon drone. Positioned outside the jam's effective radius, it became a remote pilot and a mesh node manager. Far above the bubble, it had already created a discrete, line-of-sight optical data link, a laser mesh, between itself and the decoys. When the Krasuka cut the decoy's satellite links, the Ghost Bober flipped modes. It went from scout to master controller, activating a high bandwidth, low latency mesh network that sidestepped RF jamming by using optics and short pulse comms. On Russian displays, the paradox began. The decoy transponders were dark, confirming the jam worked. Yet thermal and EO feeds from other systems showed 4 airframes maneuvering precisely and executing attack runs. How could disabled drones keep fighting? That contradiction was the Ghost Bober's trigger. The Krasuka, now pumping maximum power at a phantom contact, began to self-inflict spectral pollution. Its own emissions bled into friendlies. On the Pantsir S2 operator's console, the scope became a strobing mess of snow and false returns, friendly jamming feeding back into sensitive subsystems. His thermal sights, however, still painted 4 very real, very fast threats diving out of the fog. He fired the first interceptor, a 57 E6 hypersonic dart with the price tag of a luxury car, screamed up and locked onto Bober 2. The Ghost Bober, processing threat vectors in milliseconds, sent an instantaneous override, an evasive delta. Bober 2 pulled a sharp, calculated 3G brake that spoofed the missile's guidance. The interceptor, unable to requeue fast enough, detonated behind the target. Shrapnel carved the drone's tail, but it remained airborne. Wounded, not dead. The operator, cursing into his headset, watched the decoys split. The Russian system launched saturation shots. 2 more interceptors in quick succession. Textbook responses. Exactly what Kiev wanted. Bober 3 did not attempt to evade. It flew into the missile's path and detonated in a thermal flash, a sacrificial node in a larger algorithm. The explosion produced a bright, blinding bloom that momentarily saturated the Pantsir's thermal sensors. A designed obscurant. In that half-second of obscurity, Bober 4 dove lower and the second interceptor lost lock, impacting a ridgeline instead. 1 drone destroyed, 1 damaged, 2 still lethal. The battlefield logic had flipped. The defender now faced 3 converging threats: a limping Bober 2 closing in, Bober 4 surfacing from below, and the Ghost Bober, which had reconfigured itself into an attack coordinator. The remaining decoys initiated their final pre-programmed routine, a steep, suicidal vertical climb, not to hit a target, but to manipulate the enemy's engagement geometry. The Pantsir operator slammed the radar to maximum elevation and cued a 4th interceptor. His fire control computer, already assaulted by massive electromagnetic interference and overloaded with conflicting tracks, reached critical processing limits. The final launch command failed. The interceptor cooked off, detonating inside its own tube. A $15 million integrated air defense node had just neutralized itself. The path to the target lay open. At 150 feet, the ATAK-MS used terrain masking to ride the contours at Mach 3, a guided bullet mapping final approach in real time. As it crested the last ridge, its target, the burning Pantsir site and the fuel depot clustered behind the Nebo-M command center, lay exposed. The final terminal dive was near vertical. Ground crews had less than a second to react. ZU-23 crews scrambled to elevate and traverse, a futile choreography against a hypervelocity impactor. The ATACMS didn't create a generalized blast. It delivered focused, catastrophic overpressure and penetrative energy. Its 200-kilo-shaped charge employed a Monroe effect warhead. A hypervelocity copper jet formed and driven through a foot of reinforced roof and concrete in milliseconds. Inside the bunker, the sequence was instant and merciless. An overpressure wave that shredded sensitive electronics, and a copper jet that punched through floor and into the adjacent 70-ton diesel storage. The secondary ignition was automatic. The fuel depot detonated in a rolling inferno. 840 tons of diesel vaporized into a sustained fireball that ripped through the complex. Within seconds, ammunition stored too close to the tanks began to sympathetically detonate. The compound's destruction registered on regional seismographs, a local 1.8 magnitude event. 2:51 a.m. Irony unfolded. A Russian Iskander, guided by the same Zoopark radar that had tried to protect the complex, impacted empty mud. The HIMARS crew had survived. Their enemy's counterstrike had been aimed at a target that no longer existed. Overhead, the Ghost Bober pivoted its mission to battle damage assessment. Its thermal feed recorded the primary structure's thermal erasure and the cascade of secondary detonations across the depot. On the ground, survivors scattered. The infantry became soft targets in a kill zone they could not escape. When the dust settled, the material and human toll was stark. Hardware losses estimated at $35 million included the Nebo-M radar, a Pantsir S2 battery, and the regional C2 node, effectively the Air Defense Nerve Center for southern Crimea. Beyond equipment, an estimated 200 officers and technicians were concussed, wounded, or killed in the collapse of the command hub. The fuel loss was strategic: 840 tons of diesel, the operational reserve for multiple mechanized brigades. That single depot fueled the mobility of roughly 5,000 combat troops. With fuel gone, T-90s, BMPs, and logistics trucks faced a sudden operational pause. Mobility constrained, ammunition where it stood. Lines of operation choked. From a logistic calculus, the strike severed a 100-meter supply node without a single conventional artillery salvo. In business terms, it was a hostile takeover. Mobility, refueling, and sustainment assets seized by a single guided shot. And the strategic ripples were worse than the immediate loss. The Ghost Bomber survived. Its high-definition thermal proof of the attack streamed in near real-time and proliferated across social platforms and encrypted channels from Kiev to Vladivostok. Kremlin's spin tried to frame it as a technical malfunction, but the 4K thermal footage, the sequential detonations, the ruined Panzer, the visual narrative was indisputable. The psychological cost is the deeper wound. Every radar operator in a quiet watch station will now look at a flock of birds and ask, "Is that really birds?" The attack injected a paranoia that forces an asymmetrical arms race, disperse and diminish protective mass, or cluster and invite catastrophic concentration. Neither choice is comfortable. The Soviet-era doctrine of centralized, shielded high-value assets collides with the new economics of asymmetric warfare. $10,000 drones and a few lines of code can bankrupt billions in hardware and immobilize thousands of troops. The math is ugly. Millions invested in upgraded radars, processors, and interceptors versus a firmware patch and off-the-shelf UAVs. Final tally, a modestly funded operation, roughly $1 million in integrated strike costs, orchestrated by $10,000 of drones, neutralized a $35 million defense network, left a 5,000-man force temporarily stranded, and provoked an existential doctrinal headache for the Southern Front. The lesson is clinical. In the 21st century, the deadliest weapon may not be the biggest. It's the system that thinks better. It's the attacker who converts an opponent's technological strengths into their fatal vulnerabilities. A little fog, a handful of clever firmware tweaks, an understanding that a lumbering, predictable defense can be outthought and outpaced. Maybe next time, bring a fire extinguisher and an IT team. If that made you rethink high-tech invulnerability, hit like and subscribe to watch more Machines of War get outsmarted.